and we are continuing our Alive series, and I would love you to be vocal in these opening moments, because I would love to know, what did you want to be when you were growing up? Shout it out for me. A baker, thank you, honey. Anyone else? A bin man, someone shouted. That's the aspirations of our kids pastor, everybody. Anything else? Come on. Rock star. A bus driver. A nurse. A dentist. Loads of stuff. We all had something, a dream, something that we wanted to be. For me, like every other Scouse kid from the red half of Liverpool, I wanted to be a Liverpool player. Look at that. That is me, age 6, in my first ever Liverpool kit. I wanted to wear it today, but Laura wouldn't let me. Somehow she said it was inappropriate. I had hair as well. I'm bald by choice. I thought you should know that. I grew up wanting to be a Liverpool player, very, very quickly realised I wasn't good enough. In my teens, I wanted to be an astronaut. And then in my kind of late teens, when I was thinking about university, I actually wanted to go and be a primary school teacher. Aren't you glad God intervened? Aren't we all glad that God intervened and stopped that for us? But we all have this sense growing up that we want to do something meaningful with our lives, that we want to have purpose, that we want to contribute to the world. The Japanese have a word for this, and it's called ikigai, and it literally means a reason for being. And I don't think that stops when we grow up. I think all of us, whether you call yourself a Christian or not, we all want a reason for being. We all want a reason for purpose. We want our lives to have meaning. We don't just want to go to work, get home, eat, go to bed, and do the same thing over and over again. We long for meaning. And research shows it's really important that we do have purpose. In fact, when we lack purpose, research shows that it increases the risk of depression, of anxiety, of suicidal thoughts, and of substance abuse as well. But it's one thing to not have a purpose at all. It's a different thing to have a misguided purpose. There's this thing called a rival fallacy, that often we think that once we've got that amount of money, that we've got that position, that we've got that relationship, that we've got that car, that when our team is successful, when we get the grades that we're after, whatever it is, we think that when we get there, that will give us meaning and purpose. And when we arrive there, we see that it was fallible and it wasn't quite true. And we arrive and we think, I thought this would give me meaning and happiness and fulfillment. And so today we're going to look at how do we fulfill our purpose. And somebody who wrote one of the most popular books on purpose is a guy called Rick Warren, who's a church leader in the States. It's one of the best-selling books on purpose that the world has ever known. And he says this, he says, it's not about you. The purpose of your life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment, your peace of mind, or even your happiness. If you want to know why you were placed on this planet, you must begin with God. And so that's where we're going to begin. And to help us, we're going to look at 3 key things, and they all relate to each other. And when they overlap, they give us our sense of what our true purpose is. And we're going to use a Venn diagram today. I know, fancy. If you don't know what a Venn diagram, I want to show you by having a little bit of fun. It's basically a graphical way of showing how things relate to each other. And so our first one here, the person in this circle, the person you love more than anyone else. And in this circle, the person who annoys you more than anyone else. What's in the middle? Marriage. Of course it is. Because you love them so much, but the way that they breathe. Oh. Sorry, just a bit of therapy there. Okay, next one. Philosophy professors, the Backstreet Boys, and 3-year-old kids. What on earth could they have in common? Tell me why. Tell me why. Come on, my millennials. Okay, Manchester United, 17th placed Manchester United, or is it 16th? I don't know. And the Black Eyed Peas, what have they got in common? Both useless since Fergie left. That's my personal favourite. I love it. Okay, The last one. Bank robbers, DJs, and preachers. What on earth could all of these have in common? Put your hands up. Put your hands up in church this morning, come on. It's great, let's get serious. Let's look at the real one, eh? I could do this all day, but we won't. The three things that we are going to look and explore as we unpack what it means to fulfill our purpose is transformed motivation, and we're going to look at eternal perspective, and then we're going to look at our unique pathway. And when we find all of those and all of those overlap, there, right in that sweet spot, when we find all three of those, we can discover and fulfill our true purpose. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at another person who encountered the risen Jesus for themselves face to face. A person like you and me who got to see and meet Jesus after he'd risen from the dead. That person is Saul. And Saul goes on to write most of the New Testament. The stuff after the book of Acts is mostly Saul and his writing. But he doesn't start off as a good guy. He starts off as the person that is trying to wipe out Christianity. He's trying to delete the lie and the nonsense that Jesus rose from the dead. He's trying to delete the blasphemy that Jesus is the Messiah and the Son of God. He is determined to do it. And we meet Saul in the book of Acts, and we're going to see his transformed motivation here. And it appears in Acts 9, and it says this. It says, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats. He was authorizing Christians to be killed against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. This doesn't sound like the kind of guy that we should be talking about fulfilling our purposes, does it? But what he experiences is this incredible transformed motivation. You see, Saul was this passionate guy. He was single-minded. He was focused. He was determined to kill all of these Christians because he was faithful to the Jewish teaching. He was also a Roman citizen, which is going to be really, really important for what we look at a little bit later on. But he was probably the biggest opponent to the growth of the church in those early stages. And you see, when Jesus had died, risen again, and then he ascended into heaven, he went back up into heaven, and Leon's going to look at that next week for us as we close out the series. He gives the disciples an instruction. He tells them, go and spread the good news. And he says this, he says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. He was saying to them, don't just stay in the neighborhood. Don't just stay in Jerusalem and Judea. Go to all nations. And this moment in Acts 9 where we meet Saul, this is 20 years after Jesus had said this. And we can read the book of Acts and see that the disciples haven't left Jerusalem and Judea. The disciples are still arguing whether Gentiles, people who aren't Jews, can become Christians and become followers of the way. They're arguing about this stuff that doesn't really matter. They've not gone when Jesus said, go. And you can almost imagine the conversation in heaven where God says to Jesus, you've picked these lads and you told them to go and they're not going. And Jesus is like, no, they'll go. Well, it's been 20 years, Jesus. They're not going. We need to do something. Maybe you need to come out of retirement, Jesus. And Jesus goes, well, maybe we need to recruit somebody who's going to provoke them to go, somebody who's going to disrupt them a little bit. What about Saul? And God's like, Saul, the guy who's killing everybody who's following, let's not go there. And Jesus is like, no, I think we can do it. And so Jesus, this isn't in the Bible, by the way. I'm just for clarity, okay? And then Jesus appears to Saul when he's on his way to go and arrest and kill Christians. Jesus shows up on the road to Damascus, and this happens. It says, as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Do you know, that is one of only 7 times in the Bible where God or Jesus uses somebody's name twice. And every one of those times, it involves a moment where their world and their motivation is transformed. It involves a moment where the direction and orientation of their life is transformed. And I'm going to let the Bible nerds work out for themselves what the other 6 are. But if we move on, it says, "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." Imagine hearing Jesus say that to you. "Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do." Jesus intervenes. He meets Saul in this moment, and he transforms his motivation. And you can see, if you read on in the passage, you'll see that what happens, and his whole world is transformed. And suddenly, Jesus says, "I want to take your strengths. I want to take how you're wired. I want to take your passion. I want to take all that you are and transform it, not to killing Christians, but to spreading the good news. And I want to use you to provoke the disciples to leave Jerusalem and Judea." But you see, Jesus doesn't just do it in the Bible. Jesus does it for us, everyday people like me and you. Duncan Bannatyne, who was one of the dragons on Dragon's Den, he writes about a moment like this in his autobiography, and I want to share it with you. He's talking about a moment where he was in Romania, and he was invited to go and visit an orphanage. And what he saw there, the heartbreaking situations, the poverty, the way that children had been treated, really, really impacted him. And he shares about it. And he says, "For me, the tears came at about 10 o'clock that night. I went outside and found a quiet place at the side of the house. I couldn't stop the tears. My face was wet. My nose began to run, and I was a mess. I had no choice but to let the tears flow, and they just kept pouring out of me and wouldn't stop. After many minutes, I began to get the feeling that I wasn't alone. I was there. It was there and then that God said hello." This is a dragon, not a real life dragon, businessman. "I felt that I had been consumed by this presence, that something had completely shrouded and taken hold of me. It was unmistakable. I knew who had come, and I also knew why. It wasn't a spiritual thing. It was a Christian thing. And I felt I was being told, 'You've arrived. Join the faith. Be a Christian. This is it.'" It's like Paul on the road to Damascus, isn't it? It was profound, and I stood there stunned, considering the offer and thinking about what it would mean. I knew I wanted to keep on building up my businesses, and I wanted to keep making money. And I also knew that I wanted to carry on doing all the things I wasn't proud of. I knew I was never going to be this totally Christian guy going to church on Sundays. So I said, "No, I'm not ready." And God said, "Okay," and disappeared. Isn't that powerful? Scary, but powerful. What I love is God doesn't force himself on him, but he goes, "Okay." And I don't know, I'm not passing judgment on Duncan Bannatyne. I don't know, that book was written a little while ago now. I don't know where he is with God or whether he's made a decision or anything. But, these are huge and extreme examples. But God invites us to a transformed motivation. God wants to meet us and say, "These are the things that you're passionate about. These are your skills. These are who you are. Let's transform them to make a difference for me. Let's transform them to share the good news of Jesus." And when I say this, I'm not saying that we should all quit our jobs and work for church. Please don't do that, okay? We use this phrase at church. We use everyone, everywhere, every day. It's about, yes, you're employed to do a job, but you're called to a higher purpose. You're dropping your kids off at school, but you're open to conversations about the living God. You're doing your grades and your exams, but your grades don't define you. It's who God says you are that defines you. Maybe today you're not a Christian and you're watching and listening. Maybe today is your Saul moment. Maybe it's your Duncan Bannatyne moment where God's saying, "Hey, I want to invite you. I want to transform your motivation. I want to give you a purpose, that ikigai that the Japanese talk about." Maybe that's for you today. Let's look at the second one, and let's look at eternal perspective. You see, Saul goes on to spread the good news of Jesus all across the Mediterranean and into Europe. And he's probably responsible for us being here today because he spreads it all over as far as he can get in those times. And he goes to, if you read the New Testament, you'll hear and see and read all of these things that Paul got up to and how many times he was nearly killed and shipwrecked and beaten and all this kind of stuff. And you realize that Saul has an eternal perspective. In fact, one of the things that he writes when he's waiting in prison to see if he's going to be executed, he writes this. He says, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." You see, he knows that because of the resurrection, there is hope beyond death. He knows that because of the resurrection, death is not the end, that one day we will live in eternity with Jesus. That's why as Christians, when somebody who we know loves Jesus dies and passes away, we grieve. Of course we do, we're sad, but we grieve different because we know that one day we will be in eternity with them. In fact, Billy Graham, who's a famous evangelist, he said this: "Someday you will read or hear that Billy Graham is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. I shall be more alive than I am now. I will have just changed my address." We should all write our addresses in pencil because our home is not here. Heaven is our home. And when we realize this, I want to do a little illustration. I've got some rope here that's going to illustrate our eternal perspective. And I want you to imagine, there we go. I want you to imagine that this rope here on this side represents life before you and everything that's gone on in the Bible in the hundreds of years since the Bible's been written, eternity before you, even before the world was created. And then on this side is everything that's going to happen after us. And this tape here represents your life. The black tape is the tape bit where you're alive, where we're alive, that we're born and we go to school and we get a job and we have kids and grandkids. And then this white bit for me represents perhaps the time you're remembered for. You know, our kids will remember us, our grandkids will remember us, our great-grandkids if we're lucky. But unless we invent something or do something historical, the reality is that in 200 years' time, no one will remember Andy Hancock. And when we understand and have this sense of eternity, that life is so short, we realize it's not about getting stuff. It's not about achievements and position. When we understand that we get to spend eternity with Jesus, this stuff here on this planet that's not really our home, it's not everything. It's not everything that we're aiming for. And so when we begin to understand that, along with a transformer motivation, we can begin to understand what our true purpose may be. And then finally, the third thing that I want to look at is our unique pathway. You see, earlier on I mentioned that Saul was driven, he was focused, he was passionate. If I'm completely honest, when I read the Bible, I think I would be irritated by Saul. I think I read it and I go, he doesn't sound like a nice guy to me. I think he'd do my head in. I'm not looking forward to meeting him in heaven, if I'm allowed to say that. I'm probably not, but I've said it. But you see, what makes him slightly irritating and annoying to me makes him so good at what he was doing, at what his purpose was. You see, I mentioned that he was a Roman citizen. You know, commonly people believe that Jesus, when he met Saul on the road to Damascus, turned his name into Paul, because often we know Saul as Paul. And people think Jesus changed his name. That's not what happened. There's no record of that. You see, Saul was his Jewish name, and Paul was his Roman name. And what he did was he was uniquely positioned to be able to go into lots of different places and use the name that worked the best, that gave him the most leverage. It's kind of like British people who have Irish passports. Now that Brexit's happened, so you use whichever passport is relevant and going to get you through customs quicker. It's that kind of thing, but with his name and for the advancement of the good news of Jesus. You see, Saul was uniquely positioned and had a unique pathway that Jesus looked at him and said, I can use that guy. When I transform his motivation, when I give him an eternal perspective, and I help him discover his unique pathway, his true purpose can be delivered. And you know, we all have the same purpose. At Lifecentral Church, as Jane said earlier, we use this, helping people to find and follow Jesus. But we all do it in slightly different ways. And you know, Leon on Easter Sunday referred to Kaka, the footballer who'd shown a vest. He'd taken his vest off in a European Cup final in 2007, saying, I belong to Jesus. And 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, I was able to be in the stadium when Liverpool were confirmed Premier League champions. I was always going to mention it at some point. And Cody Gakpo scored the third goal that day and whipped off his top, revealing a T-shirt that says, I belong to Jesus. You see, I've no doubt that Kaka and Cody Gakpo are seeing that as they're helping people to find and follow Jesus. But we're not called to be like them. I want you to imagine you're in work tomorrow and you complete a task. You send a really good email that you're proud of. And you whip your top off, revealing the T-shirt that says, I belong to Jesus, and knee slide across the office. You're going to get looked at a little bit weird because you're not a footballer. You see, we're called to do different. We're not called to do that. Please don't do that in your workplace. You'll probably lose your job. But you know, the problem is we get into this comparison game, is that we think we've got to be like somebody else in order to follow Jesus, in order to live out my purpose. I've got to do what Leon does. I've got to write a book, or I've got to do what Dan does and play the guitar, or I've got to be able to sing, or I've got to be able to do this and this and this, and we compare ourselves. And actually, we're called to be us. Jesus wants to use you in your unique gifting, in your placement, in your skill set, in your history, in your past, and use that for his glory. You know, sometimes we even compare ourselves to people in the Bible and we come up short. You know, we hear we've got to be like Jesus. And so we read the stories of Jesus and go, every day Jesus did something incredible and performed miracles. How am I going to do that? Well, I've been reading a book called The Expectation Gap by Steve Cuss, and it's really helped me out with some perspective on this. You see, Jesus was in ministry for about 3.5 years. Okay, he was performing miracles and teaching. That is around about 1,278 days. The book of John records 20 unique days of that 3.5 years. That is 1.56% of the time that Jesus was in ministry. So when we read the Gospels and we read the Bible and we read the stories of what Jesus did, we're not reading a detailed account. You know, we never read that Jesus did his emails for one afternoon, or that he went to the shops to get a bottle of milk. We don't read about how he traveled for 3 or 4 days and what happened. We just see the highlights. Effectively, when we look at the Gospels, we're looking at Jesus' Instagram accounts, and we're seeing the highlights. And the problem is we compare the highlights to our miserable, boring, mundane, average lives, and we think, I'm not good enough to follow Jesus. See, Jesus invites you and I, boring, average, mundane people, to follow him. You see, I have no doubt that God can use extraordinary people to do extraordinary things, but he also wants to use ordinary people like me and you to do really ordinary things, to be everyone, everywhere, every day. Inviting us on our unique pathway to discover how might God use me in the circumstances that I am in today. And so, what are our next steps? I want to invite us to take some next steps to consider. The first is, I want us to recognize your uniqueness. Recognize your story. Recognize what God's put in you. Maybe there are things in your past that God wants to use to propel you into your purpose today. Some of the experiences that you've had, maybe your character, maybe your unique wiring of how you've been put together, how God wired you together. What is it that makes you different? What are the skills? What are the best and worst parts of you that God wants to use? The second thing, next step, is that we can take a holistic approach. It's rare, I would say, that we have one single purpose. We have multiple purposes. You know, I'm an employee, I'm a boss, I'm a colleague, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm an uncle, I'm a cousin, I'm a client, I'm a customer. I take up loads of different roles and responsibilities, and so do you. And I have to find my unique purpose in each of those different roles. And so maybe there are different things and different spaces that you are in, that your role and your purpose can change. And then thirdly, go on a journey of discovery, constantly discovering, what is my purpose in this? We all go through seasons of life. Maybe you're a new parent and your purpose looks completely different. But in 20 years' time, you might be an empty nester and your purpose will look different. Go on a journey of constantly discovering, God, what's my purpose in this? Where are you calling me to? What are you doing? Try new things, test stuff out. You know, one of the things that we have in place here at Lifecentral is our dream team. Now, I'm not saying join the dream team to fulfill your purpose, but joining the dream team can help you to do that and help you to discover your purpose. As you try stuff out and you go, oh, I'll try the kids team. No, that's definitely not for me, but the car park team, and I love it. And so I want to invite you to go on a journey of discovery, and we want to help you with that through our dream team, if that's going to help you. And so there's loads of stuff on our website. You can sign up, chat to the guys in the connection point. We would love to help you go on that journey of discovery. But you see, when we look at this Venn diagram again, and we have a transformed motivation, an eternal perspective, and a unique pathway, when we get all of those, that's when we can begin to discover and live out our true purpose. And so I want to give us some time today to respond and listen to God. I want to invite you to invite God to speak to you personally. We're going to sing a song that is a bit of an old one, but if you're new to us, it'll be new to you. It's, Lord, I give you my heart and I give you my soul. I live for you alone. Every breath that I take, every moment I'm awake, Lord, have your way in me. And what I want us to do is ask God to speak to us, and we're going to consider what God might want to say to us as a whole, and we're going to sing and we're going to respond. This isn't like a final song to softly end the service. We want to continue to do business with God here. So I want to invite you, church, to stand to your feet if you're able to. And I pray, God, thank you that you don't have to use us, but you choose to use us. That in you we have our purpose and being. And so, God, I pray right now as we invite you, we say we trust you that you would speak to us. God, would you challenge us? Would you encourage us? Would you affirm us in the things that you created us to be? God, would you shape us and carve out the things that we don't need to carry into our future? But God, I pray that we would hear you speak profoundly into our lives right now. In your mighty name, amen.